I couldn't see the red laser dancing on his heart, but I could smell the gunpowder on his fiancée's breath. Rain-slicked pavement smelled of wet stone and exhaust, but as I stepped toward the restaurant entrance, a ghost found me. It was a scent I hadn't smelled in 3 years, expensive sandalwood and cold, sharp metal. Rhett Varel. My hands trembled as I clutched my basket of lilies, the stems snapping under the pressure of my grip. Inside the restaurant, the air was a suffocating cocktail of heavy perfumes and roasting meat. I moved by instinct, counting steps, 22 paces to the center of the room. I stopped near table 4. To anyone else, the scene was a portrait of luxury, the rustle of silk, the clink of crystal, and the low, predatory rhythm of Rhett's fingers on a leather menu. But to me, the air was screaming. Beside him, Brielle Vane leaned in. Her voice was a honeyed whisper, but her pulse was racing, a frantic, irregular thrum I could hear even over the violins. She smelled of vanilla and the distinct, acrid tang of gun oil. She wasn't whispering sweet nothings. She was giving a countdown. I didn't need eyes to know that somewhere in the shadows, a finger was tightening on a trigger. I had 10 seconds to become a savior or a witness to a massacre. The rain-slicked pavement of the city always had a specific vocabulary, a language of oil, exhaust, and wet stone that I had learned to read with my feet and my nose. But as I stood outside the heavy brass doors of the Gilded Lotus, a ghost found me. It was a scent that didn't belong in the present, a sharp, cold melody of sandalwood and high-grade metallic oil. My breath hitched, the basket of lilies in my arms suddenly feeling like a leaden weight. Memory is a cruel thing when you're blind. It doesn't fade into blurry Polaroids, it stays vivid in the senses. 3 years ago, that same scent had been the last thing I expected to smell before I died. I had been an accidental witness to a warehouse deal gone wrong, shivering in the dark behind a stack of crates. I remembered the heavy click of a safety being switched off and the sudden, overwhelming aroma of that sandalwood cologne as a man leaned down. "She can't see a thing, Rhett," a gravelly voice had said back then. "End it." But the man, Rhett, had paused. I had felt the heat of his presence, the calm, predatory stillness of a wolf. He had reached out, his thumb brushing a stray petal from my hair, and he had let me go, with a single, silent command to his men. I never forgot that mercy. Now, that same scent was drifting through the exhaust of idling limousines, stronger than before. Rhett Varel was here. I stepped closer to the entrance, my cane tapping a rhythmic warning against the concrete. As the doors opened to let a departing couple out, the internal atmosphere of the restaurant spilled onto the sidewalk. It should have been a warm invitation of roasting garlic and expensive wine, but my skin pricked with a different sensation. Beneath the luxury, there was a jagged edge to the air. I inhaled deeply, filtering through the layers of perfume and expensive cigars. There it was, the unmistakable copper-sour tang of fresh adrenaline and the cold, biting smell of gun oil. It wasn't just one person. I could track them by the way they displaced the air, men with heavy footfalls and even heavier hearts, positioned like statues in the blind spots of the foyer. They smelled of the hunt. They were the shadows lurking behind the silk curtains, the hitmen waiting for a signal. And in the center of that web sat the man who had spared me, oblivious to the fact that his past, and his enemies, had finally caught up to him. I gripped the handle of my basket, the stems of the lilies snapping under my white-knuckled pressure. I was just a flower girl, a permanent bystander in a world of monsters, but the debt I owed was screaming in my blood. I couldn't see the danger, but I could smell the funeral they were preparing for him. Thorne's grip on my arm was a brand of iron as he dragged me into the darkness of the wet alley, the roar of his staged fury still echoing through the market stalls. Behind us, the golden glow of the lanterns was swallowed by the shadows of the city. We moved fast, our shoes skidding on the slick, refuse-strewn pavement as the first crack of a suppressed rifle shattered a nearby ceramic pot. Thorne didn't flinch. His movements were surgical. A predator who had spent a lifetime turning violence into a choreographed dance. "Left," he barked, shoving me past a row of steaming industrial vents that hissed like cornered vipers. I risked a glance back toward the table we had just abandoned. Through the haze of charcoal smoke and the frantic movements of the crowd, I saw Arden. She wasn't fleeing in terror like the other diners. She was standing perfectly still, silhouetted against the vibrant market lights, her smartphone pressed to her ear as she directed the shadow figures closing in on our position. "She's not running," I whispered, my breath hitching as we ducked behind a stack of rusted shipping crates. "She's watching us." Thorne pulled me flat against the cold brick wall, his chest heaving against mine in the narrow space. In the dim crimson of an overhead emergency light, his face looked as though it had been carved from obsidian, sharp, angular, and suddenly ancient with the weight of realization. He didn't look like a man mourning a lost love. He looked like a king watching his own crown being melted down for scrap. "It wasn't just the money," he murmured, his voice a low, jagged rasp that vibrated through my own skin. "I checked the accounts. She's had enough offshore to disappear 10 times over." He reached for a small black pistol hidden at his ankle, his tattooed fingers moving with a terrifying mechanical grace. "I taught her how to spot a weakness," he continued, his eyes meeting mine with a microscopic crack in the ice. "I taught her how to wait for the perfect moment to strike when a man feels most secure. She didn't sell me out for a payday, Alara. She sold me out for the seat. She wants the empire I built, and she's using the very tactics I carved into her mind to take it." The realization seemed to settle over him like a burial shroud, turning his initial shock into a cold, lethal pragmatism. He wasn't just fighting a traitor, he was fighting his own legacy. For a second, the world was a frozen tableau of gold leaf and hidden steel. I could feel the vibration of Rhett's chest as he drew a sharp, calculating breath. He didn't ask if I was lying. He didn't have time. The air in the room suddenly curdled with the sound of a distant, muffled pop, the first shot hitting the reinforced glass exactly where his head had been a second before. Then the darkness came. A heavy mechanical thud echoed from the basement as the main breakers were killed, plunging the Gilded Lotus into a void so absolute it made the sighted scream in terror. Panic erupted like a physical wave, the sound of chairs scraping, glass shattering, and the high-pitched, frantic tone of Brielle calling out a name that wasn't Rhett's. In the pitch black, the powerful were suddenly paralyzed, their eyes searching for a light that wasn't coming. But for me, nothing had changed. The dark was my home. "Stand up," I commanded. My voice didn't tremble this time. Rhett's hand was still a vice on my arm, but I felt the shift in his posture, the subtle tremor of a man who had lost his most trusted weapon, his sight. "I can't see the exit," he hissed, his breath hot against my temple. The sandalwood scent was spiked now with a sharp, metallic tang of cold sweat. "I can," I whispered. "Follow the sound of my cane. Do not let go." I didn't head for the front doors where the hitmen would be funneling in, guided by night vision goggles that would be useless in the labyrinth I was about to enter. Instead, I pivoted toward the scent of industrial floor wax and the low-frequency hum of the industrial refrigerators. I led him past the chaos of the dining room, navigating by the texture of the carpet and the way the air cooled as we neared the service corridors. We burst through a set of swinging doors. The kitchen was a symphony of hissing steam and the smell of scorched copper. I felt Rhett stumble behind me, his boots slick with spilled oil. He was a king in the light, but But here, he was a child in the woods. "Left," I barked, pulling him into a narrow service tunnel that smelled of damp concrete and ancient dust. "How do you know where we are?" he asked, his voice echoing off the tight walls. I could hear his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I matched with the steady tap, tap, tap of my cane. "I've sold flowers at the service entrance of every building on this block for years, Rhett," I said, leading him deeper into the belly of the city. "I know the veins of this place better than the people who built it." Behind us, the heavy metal door to the kitchen groaned open. The rhythmic, synchronized footsteps of the men in suits echoed into the tunnel, heavy, confident, and closing in. They had flashlights, but in these twisting, light-swallowing passages, beams of light only created more shadows. "They're coming," Rhett muttered, his hands sliding down to grip mine, his fingers interlaced with mine in a desperate grounding hold. "Let them," I replied, a cold confidence settling into my bones. "In the light, you're the boss, but down here, in the dark, you're mine." The service tunnel finally opened into a forgotten basement storage room, miles away from the chaos of the restaurant. The air here was stagnant, smelling of old paper and damp brick, but it was safe. Rhett finally released my hand, the sudden absence of his heat leaving my skin cold. I heard him lean against a wall, his breathing heavy and ragged, echoing in the small space. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice dropping into that dangerous low register that usually signaled an execution. I heard the faint shing of metal. He was checking a blade or a backup piece. A flower girl doesn't just detect a sniper's laser. You knew my name. You knew what was coming. "I knew your scent, Rhett," I said, standing my ground in the center of the dark room. 3 years ago, you spared a girl in a warehouse. You smelled of sandalwood and cold steel then, just as you do now. I don't forget the smell of the man who gave me back my life. I heard him take a step toward me, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He was close enough now that I could feel the radiation of his suspicion. "And Brielle? How did you know about her?" "Because she was too perfect," I replied, tilting my head. I could hear her heart racing, but it wasn't the rhythm of a woman in love. It was the rhythm of a hunter, waiting for the kill. But it was more than that. I've been near her 3 times this week as I sold flowers on the corner. Every time she smelled of vanilla and something sharp, something synthetic that didn't belong in a perfume. I reached out, my fingers brushing the air until I found his lapel. He flinched, but didn't pull away. I inhaled deeply near his chest. "There. The scent is on you now. It's a chemical marker, Rhett. It's faint, but it's consistent. It doesn't wash off easily. She wasn't wearing perfume for you. She was marking you." Rhett went deathly still. I heard him lift his own sleeve to his nose, followed by a low, guttural curse that vibrated through the floor. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The vanilla wasn't just a scent, it was a beacon, a high-tech tracking pheromone that allowed the snipers to lock onto his position even through smoke or low light. Every hug, every Judas kiss, every time she leaned in to whisper a lie, she was painting a target on his heart. "She's been tagging me," he whispered, the betrayal sounding like glass breaking in his throat. "For months, every meeting, every safe house, she was the leak." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his mounting rage. In the dark, I could hear his pulse slowing, turning from frantic survival into the steady, cold beat of a man planning a war. He had been blind in the light, distracted by beauty and false loyalty. Now, in the absolute blackness of a basement, he was finally starting to see. "You saved me from a ghost, Kezzy. Now you're going to help me hunt one." The cold damp of the basement storage room felt like a tomb, but for Rhett, it was an interrogation chamber where the only evidence was the air itself. I could hear him pacing, a restless predator confined to a cage of shadows. His movements were jagged, fueled by the realization that his life had been a map drawn by his enemies. "I have 12 lieutenants, Kezi," he said, his voice a low scrape against the silence. "Men who have bled for me. Men I've paid in gold and loyalty. If Brielle was the beacon, who were the wolves on the floor? Who stood by and watched the laser find my heart?" I closed my eyes, though it made no difference, and reached back into the sensory tapestry of the restaurant. "I can't give you names, Rhett, but I can give you their souls. I remember the men behind you. They didn't smell like diners. They smelled like iron and anticipation." I leaned my head back against the cold brick, letting the sounds replay in the theater of my mind. The one to your left, the one with the heavy, rhythmic breathing, he has a mechanical heart, or at least a watch that sounds like one, a high-frequency tourbillon. It was ticking at 6 beats per second, perfectly synchronized with his breath. He was calm. Too calm. He wasn't waiting for a catastrophe. He was waiting for an appointment. Rhett went still. I heard him exhale a name through gritted teeth. "Marcello. He's the only one obsessed enough with Swiss movements to wear a Grubel Forsey to a dinner hit." "Then there was the man by the kitchen doors," I continued, my voice steady. His breath was shallow, caught in the top of his throat. He was wheezing slightly. The scent of menthol and tobacco was thick on him. But more than that, I heard the leather of his holster creak every time he shifted his weight. He wasn't guarding the door to keep people out. He was bracing it to keep you in. "Vico," Rhett hissed. The sound was like a blade being drawn. "My head of security. The menthol cigarettes. He's been trying to quit for 10 years. I moved deeper into the memory, past the clink of silverware and the smell of Brielle's vanilla trap. There was a third. He was further back, near the bar. He didn't move at all. His heart rate was the lowest in the room, a slow, cold thrum. But he carried the scent of old grease and cheap gun oil, not the high-end stuff Brielle used. He smelled like a man who does the dirty work in the alleys, not the boardroom. "The butcher," Rhett whispered. I felt him move closer to me, the air shifting as he hovered in my space. "You've given me the names of the 3 men I trusted most with my life. Marcello, Vico, and the butcher, all of them standing in the background, watching the countdown." The weight of the betrayal was a physical presence in the room, thicker than the dust. Rhett's hand found my shoulder, not with the bruising grip of before, but with a strange, heavy reverence. He was a man who had built an empire on sight and power, only to realize he had been blind to the rot within his own house. "They think I'm dead in the rubble of the Lotus," Rhett said, his voice turning into a promise of violence. "They think they're clearing the table for a new king. They don't know that I've found a witness who sees the things they can't even hide in the dark." The damp basement air was slowly replaced by the scent of expensive leather and aged paper as Rhett moved me to a secondary safe house, a library hidden behind the stone facade of an old brownstone. He didn't treat me like a fragile doll anymore. His movements toward me were precise, marked by a new, sharp respect. I could hear him opening a heavy mahogany case, the velvet lining whispering against the contents. "You've spent your life being invisible, Kezi," Rhett said, his voice closer now, vibrating with a cold, focused energy. "People speak around you because they think your lack of sight means a lack of presence. They think you are a statue holding lilies." I felt him reach for my hand, his fingers surprisingly steady as he turned my palm upward. That is their greatest mistake, and it will be their last. He didn't press a cold barrel of a gun into my hand. Instead, he placed something small, cool, and metallic against my skin, a delicate brooch shaped like a rose, its petals sharp enough to prick. "This is a digital recorder, shielded against the sweeps they'll run at the masquerade gala," he explained, his thumb brushing over the hidden activation switch in the center of the bloom. "I don't need you to pull a trigger. I need you to be what you've always been, the silent observer that no one suspects." I ran my fingertips over the intricate metalwork. The thorns were real, designed to blend into the aesthetic of a high-end floral arrangement. "You're sending me back into the den of lions," I whispered, the weight of the device feeling heavier than any basket of flowers I'd ever carried. "I'm sending you to be my eyes where mine are known," he countered, and for the first time I heard a note of genuine partnership in his tone. He leaned in, the scent of sandalwood and determination enveloping me. "Brielle and the others believe I am a ghost. At the gala, they will speak freely of their new empire. You will catch their voices, their scents, and their confessions on these thorns." He stepped back, and I could hear the rustle of a garment bag. "There is a dress. It's the color of a bruised midnight, made of silk that won't make a sound when you move." I realized then that Rhett wasn't just using me, he was arming me with the only weapon that could dismantle a conspiracy built on shadows, the truth. I gripped the metal rose, feeling the sharp sting of the thorn against my thumb. I was no longer just a survivor of his past. I was the architect of his vengeance. The grand ballroom of the Vane estate was a cavern of echoes, a vast space that smelled of expensive wax, vintage champagne, and the suffocating musk of lilies, a scent Brielle had likely chosen as a cruel trophy of the night she thought I died. The silk of my midnight blue dress whispered against my legs, a soft, fluid sound that felt like water moving through the crowd. My mask was a delicate lace that covered my milky eyes, though it did nothing to hinder the way I mapped the room. To everyone else, I was just a beautiful, nameless companion to a man they believed was a corpse. Rhett walked beside me, his presence a localized storm. He was a man who had walked into his own wake, his steps measured and heavy with the weight of a ghost. I could feel the tension radiating off him, the sandalwood scent of his skin sharpened by the adrenaline of a man entering a den of lions. Everyone was masked, their faces hidden behind porcelain and gold, but their scents were as distinctive as fingerprints. "They're here," I breathed, my voice barely a thread in the tapestry of the orchestra's violin concerto. "To the left, near the champagne fountain, the one who smells of menthol and cedar." "Vico." Rhett's voice was a low vibration, a sound only I could catch. I drifted away from him, moving into the thick of the crowd like a shadow through smoke. People didn't move for me. They barely acknowledged I was there, exactly as Rhett had predicted. I was the invisible flower girl, now dressed as a queen, but still a bystander in their eyes. I navigated by the scent of the men I had memorized in that dark basement. I caught the scent of Marcello near the balcony, the metallic, oily smell of his watch clashing with the expensive cognac in his glass. I moved toward him, the rose-shaped brooch on my chest cold against my skin. As I passed, I caught the low, sharp cadence of his voice. He was talking to someone who smelled of vanilla, Brielle. "The transition must be seamless," Brielle whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the sweet scent she wore like a shroud. "If the other families suspect Rhett's body wasn't recovered, the alliance fractures. We announce the merger tonight." "And the butcher?" asked Marcello, the tick-tick-tick of his watch a frantic heartbeat in my ears. "He's on the balcony," Brielle replied, her tone icy, "waiting for my signal. This time there will be no mistakes, no blind girls to hide behind." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I had the confession. The thorns on my rose had captured the betrayal. But as I turned to find Rhett, the scent of old grease and cheap gun oil suddenly filled my lungs. The butcher was close. The scent of the butcher was a rot that no amount of expensive gala perfume could mask, a cloying, heavy stench of old grease and cold iron that seemed to swallow the air around me. I moved toward the balcony doors, my cane abandoned for the fluid, deceptive grace of a woman who belonged in this world of predators. The orchestra was reaching a frantic crescendo, the violin screaming in a way that mirrored the pulse thrumming in my throat. I could feel the cold draft from the open terrace, and with it, the unmistakable metallic tang of a sniper rifle being assembled in the dark. Brielle was standing center stage, her vanilla scent now a suffocating cloud, as she prepared to address the gathered heads of the underworld. I felt Rhett move into position near the podium, his presence a silent, looming shadow. He was waiting for my word, his life once again balanced on the edge of my senses. "He's above you," I whispered into the small transmitter hidden beneath the lace of my mask, my voice a ghost against the roar of the crowd. "The balcony. Third pillar. I can smell the gun oil and the menthol on the breeze. Brielle is reaching for her phone. The signal is coming now." The room seemed to tilt as I heard the sharp, unmistakable click of a phone screen being tapped. Brielle's heart rate was a frantic, triumphant staccato. But before the butcher could pull the trigger, the massive chandeliers in the ballroom flickered and died, plunged into the same absolute darkness that had saved us at the restaurant. In the void, I heard the rose brooch on my chest hum as Rhett activated the house speakers, playing back the recording of Brielle and Marcello's confession. Their voices filled the hall, sharp, cold, and damning, stripping away the masks of loyalty they had worn for years. The underworld stood in a stunned, murderous silence as they heard Brielle describe the Judas kiss and the chemical marker she had used to paint a target on Rhett's heart. When the lights slammed back on, the world had changed. Rhett was standing on the balcony, his hand wrapped around the butcher's throat, the sniper rifle cast aside like a broken toy. Below him, Brielle stood frozen in the center of the floor, the vanilla scent of her betrayal finally laid bare before the men she had tried to manipulate. The red laser dot on Rhett's chest was gone, replaced by the cold, hard light of a man who had finally regained his vision. The flower girl had bloomed into a witness, and the empire of shadows was finally forced into the light. The silence following the recording was more devastating than the gunfire that followed. Brielle didn't scream or beg. She stood paralyzed as the men who once bowed to her moved aside, leaving her isolated in a circle of cold, judgmental glares. Rhett descended from the balcony with the butcher's blood staining his cuffs, but his eyes weren't on his fallen lieutenants. They were on me. He walked past the chaos of the arrests and the dismantling of the Vane legacy, as if the entire underworld had vanished, leaving only the scent of sandalwood and a new, grounding peace. Brielle was removed from the hall, her vanilla scent fading into a bitter memory as she was led away to face the cold justice of the families she had betrayed. Rhett didn't seek the traditional vengeance of a public execution. Instead, he chose a more surgical erasure, stripping the conspirators of their names, their wealth, and their place in the city they had tried to steal. The old ways, the shadows, the chemical markers, and the reliance on fear, were burned away in the light of the truth we had captured together. In the weeks that followed, the Empire began to transform. Rhett moved his base of operations from the glass-walled fortresses of his past to the quiet, sensory-rich brownstones where the world was felt rather than just watched. He began to dismantle the corrupt pillars of his business, using my unique vision to identify the rot in the foundations. I sat beside him in meetings, not as a decoration or a silent witness, but as the final arbiter of truth. I could hear the hesitation in a lawyer's heart, smell the sweat of a trader's greed, and feel the shift in the air when a deal turned sour. He no longer relied on the red lasers or the cameras that had failed him. He relied on the girl who had recognized his soul by its scent. Together, we built something new. A kingdom that didn't hide in the dark, but understood it. Rhett had regained his empire, but he had lost his appetite for the cold tyranny that had almost cost him his life. As we stood on the terrace of our new home, the city hummed below us, a vibrant map of sounds and smells. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. Rhett reached out, his hand finding mine with the practiced ease of a man who no longer needed to see to know where he stood. He looked out at the lights of Chicago, seeing the vastness of the world he ruled, while I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of wet stone, distant lilies, and the man beside me. He saw the world, and I felt it, and for the first time in both our lives, the vision was perfectly clear.